You're listening to a podcast by Great Kids. To learn more about us, visit our website at greatkidsinc.org.
This is Different Eyes, the view from the heart of another, a Great Kids podcast about overcoming bias in others and in ourselves. We'll be talking about how we can learn to see what others see, and vice versa, helping others see what we see. Our discussions will revolve around bias, cognitive bias and implicit bias, and how this all relates to the work that you do to support families. Looking back over the past year has proven interesting in so many ways. One day, our reflections evolved into a discussion of cognitive bias and all the ways that this affects decision-making, ours and everyone else's, without us even realizing it. The conversation got interesting enough that it sparked the idea for this podcast. We hope that by beginning to look through the eyes of others and also helping them to see what we see, we might all start to see things that maybe without each other's help, we never would have noticed. Hi everyone, welcome to episode 10 of our podcast series on cognitive bias. I've got Shauna Donaldson, the Great Kids CEO, Estela Navarro, the Director of Training and Technical Assistance for Great Kids, and Jennifer Hayes, the Great Kids Product Development Manager. Welcome to all of you. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, Dana. Excited to be here. I love the topic today.
Glad to join for another great group conversation.
Thank you so much for having me again. I'm so excited to join y'all.
Yeah, we had so much fun last time. We had to invite y'all back again. So the more the merrier, right? So it's really great to have all of you with us. We're still discussing cognitive bias, or those errors in thinking that happen because we need to process a lot of information just really quickly. And these cognitive biases are something that we all have in common. And that can sometimes lead us to problems in our relationships with other people. Today's specific bias is called the illusory truth effect. And this bias means that our brains perceive the things that we hear frequently as true. In other words, if you hear something enough times, you'll start to believe it's true. Now, I have a little bit of a hard time like wrapping my head around that. I'm like, there are certain things that I don't care how many times I heard them, I'm not going to believe it's true. But apparently, my brain sees things a little bit differently. So I'll give you an example. I remember growing up, we were all told that we had to wait at least a half hour after we ate before we could go swimming. Anybody else hear that one when you were young? And I don't know if it's still true, but that was a widely held belief. Our grandparents believed it. Our parents believed it. We heard it all the time, so we believed it too. And believe it or not, so many people were concerned about eating after swimming that the American Red Cross actually issued a scientific advisory review in a research journal that said, currently available information suggests that eating before swimming is not a contributing risk for drowning and can be dismissed as a myth. So there you have it, folks. You can eat and jump right in the water. Does anybody else have any other examples of this one? Jennifer?
Yeah, this is an interesting bias to think about. It's like if someone says something enough times and with conviction, I just start to believe it. I think about when I get a tickle in my throat, my husband has always told me, start taking vitamin C. And so I have been told over and over again to take vitamin C to ward off sickness. So I looked this up and there's actually not any evidence to this truth or lie, really, that I have been believing for many, many, many years. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Vitamin
I
C.
think we've all heard that one, right? I think even before I went and got my last vaccine, I took extra vitamin C just in case. I don't know, right? How about you, Estela? Any examples from your world?
Dana, one example that comes to my mind is when I see these TV commercials advertising how a cup of tea or maybe a pill a day of certain medication, or even wearing a slimming belt for a few days will make you look like in this perfect shape, body shape. And and what is so interesting is that the ad says that it will happen in just a few days, right?
Mhm.
So being healthy, we know takes a lot of time and work and effort, and to look physically shape takes a lot of time. But it's these commercials that you get to hear all the time, right? And over and over, that we might even start thinking, well, they might work. Even when we know better, we still, may fall into this, you know, um, situation or this wrong impression that, maybe I'll give it a try, and it doesn't work. So,
Yeah,
um, and I
I
think
can't
our
tell you how many
facility,
things I've bought
yeah,
because of
Mm,
that
right.
exact same thing. My family will tell you one time I bought 4 vacuum cleaners in the middle of the night infomercial blitz. No, but that's another story. Shauna, how about you? Any examples you can think of?
The next time I need a vacuum cleaner, I know
I
who to
got a few
call,
extras.
right?
That's right. Yeah,
You've got the inventory. I've loved all this
everybody got vacuum cleaners for
stuff.
Christmas that year.
You were like Oprah, right? Handing out the vacuums that year for Christmas.
Yeah.
I love this one because it's so true in so many different parts of my life where, I've heard something over and over and I believe it. I think about my mom growing up told me if I went out in the rain, I would catch a cold. Or if I didn't dry my hair completely and I went out, it would make me sick. And she still tells us that today, when my son has a soccer game outdoors and it's raining. And then, the other one I thought of was there's a road that I drive on in my local community. And I've heard my whole life that it's one of the most dangerous roads in all of Kentucky. Now, I have no idea if that's true or not, but I have heard it so much. I have lectured my child for 10 years that he could never drive that road when he becomes a driver.
Right.
Right. And I don't know if there's any science to that or not.
Right. Right. Yeah, so these are all really good examples. Repeated statements are perceived to be much more truthful than new statements. So, like I'm looking back at Estela's vitamin C example, and I'm still in my mind. I'm going, that's that new information does not compute. I want to keep on believing that vitamin C, right? Will keep. I guess it was your example, Jennifer, right? That vitamin C will keep me healthier. And my brain is going, I don't care what the research says. I believe this to be true. So I'm still struggling with them. This effect is really clearly something that marketing professionals, as you mentioned, Estela, even cult leaders and politicians understand really, really well. In other words, if you say something enough times, people will start to believe it. And as we kind of talk about these shared cognitive biases, I always start to wonder, where does this come from? Why do we have this illusory truth bias?
Mhm.
Any thoughts about that, Shauna? How about you?
Well, I go back to, I guess, what I've learned in my work, with great kids through all of the education and training. And it makes me think about how we talk about that neural pathways. They get wired with repeated exposure, and that's how we learn things or things imprint, and we can recall that for later. And so that's kind of how I make sense of it, is that it's just that repeated exposure in our brain. It starts to get hardwired that this is real.
Yeah, yeah, really. Even if you don't notice it, right? It's still
Right.
happening. Even if you didn't even notice that you heard something, you may have heard it. So, Estela, what do you think? Any ideas why this one is so prevalent?
yeah. Well, what I have found is that and maybe this might be true for a lot of people, is that it seems easier to process those repeated statements
Mm.
than to process new information. So something happens in our brain that, gets us into this default setting, into going to the information that we already know, even when we know, or regardless if that information came from a credible source. We hear this repeated information so many times that it becomes true to us, and that's where we go as a default, in processing that information that we is already kind of stored in our system.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And the struggle is real, right? Jennifer, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Estella and Ashana on both of those. And it makes me think that it's like our brain is taking a shortcut. It needs, we're processing so much information, and we're taking in so much on a daily basis that our brain needs shortcuts. And I think that's maybe one of the reasons we have this particular bias.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to think about, right? I was reading the research kind of tells us that each day we make somewhere around 35,000 decisions. Like that's huge when you think about that. 35,000 decisions a day. And with all those choices to make, the huge volume of information that's coming at us every second, um, and so just those two factors alone, we can't possibly hope to process everything as deeply as we might like to. We've talked a bit about this before, but there are two really different processing systems in our brain. One that's that fast automatic one, and one that really just happens without us even being conscious of it, and one that requires more effort or conscious thought. And it's really this second version is the one that we like to think that we all use most of the time, right? But it actually takes up so much of our energy that we couldn't possibly use it for all 35,000 of those decisions that we make. And we really all prefer the easier system. I think that experts refer to this as processing fluency. The problem with processing fluency is that it can influence our judgments about the accuracy of a claim. If it's relatively effortless to produce or to process a piece of information, it makes us feel like it must be accurate. And I think we can all think of probably too many examples of this over just the last couple of years. Um, but let's talk about how this might come into play in the world of parenting or home visiting. Thoughts on how this could cause problems there, Estela?
Um, Dana, you just mentioned something that is so real. There is so much information out there. So when I think of parents and all the information that they receive and that they're exposed to, whether that's on TV, on social media, and this constant information about um, ways, or even devices or tools that might support their child and in different aspects of development, they they get so much information that what's real and what's not real or truth becomes not very clear. And so their exposure to all this information about, you know get this device will support with, language development, and get this other device or get this other product, they start believing that that is true, and it could actually lead into very uh, challenging situations when it comes to development, because we as parents get so much information every day that sorting that information out becomes very tricky, and it's a lot of work as well to be able
Yeah,
to figure it out what's real and what's not real.
yeah, really good point. Parents get a little bit overwhelmed for sure. Jennifer, your thoughts?
Yeah. When I was thinking about this, I was thinking about kind of like what Shauna was saying is that, she heard her mom say something emphatically and, confidently, and it became truth, right? And when I was visiting with parents in my home visiting practice, I would often hear parents say the things that their parents told them as, children, or how they parented. And so one of the things that I remember is, let the baby cry it out. I don't know if you all have heard that before, or, parents have said that over and over and over again. And it's kind of become a widely held belief that, we should let babies cry it out, and not go in and pick them up every time they cry. And we started believing that, but as we look into the research and the science, and especially being part of Great Kids and learning everything there is, to know about self-regulation, research clearly shows that when parents, respond to their babies quickly and consistently, these children have better self-regulation skills than those who were left to cry it out. So that's definitely can have an impact on child's development.
Yeah, great example, and probably one of the things that we spend the most time talking to families about. For sure, that's a myth that has become widely believed. So that's a challenging one. Shauna, what about you? What are your thoughts on this?
It occurred to me as Estella and Jennifer were both talking that one of the other places that I think as a parent myself, and parents that I was able to serve in home visiting, received information from, or maybe people in power, or people that we respected, or in the community, right? There's sometimes these norms that exist, I think, in different pockets that we interact with in our lives. And I can remember, some conversations that I've had that people felt strongly about how I disciplined my child, or punished my child. And there was a lot of pressure, that this is the way to do it. So it may not have been a family member or the media, but it was these other people that I didn't even think about until just now that had some type of influence over me. And I can remember when my little one was small that I had a healthcare practitioner that suggested to me that I put cereal in my child's formula to help him sleep better at night. And he was about 2.5 months old.
Yeah.
And I was, I questioned that because I knew the research, because I'd been involved with the curriculum for so long. I knew what the research said about feeding and what those stages should look like. And when I actually kind of pushed back to this health practitioner, they were kind of shocked and surprised. And I said, I need to understand the science behind this. And admittedly, they didn't have it.
Right.
So I even go back to that person who was a person in power that might too have, it was an old family practice that had just followed through the years that became part of their conversation.
Yeah, definitely a couple of great examples there. And all of them are really good examples, and really get us thinking about how this might come into play for home visitors and parents. It all links back, I think, to that processing fluency concept. When we're repeatedly exposed to that same information, it gradually becomes really easier for us to process. And as we've seen, the less effort we have to expand to process something, the more positive we feel about that thing. We actually start to want to believe that it's true, because it's just easier for us to believe that, whether it's discipline or it's formulas, or, like whatever the situation is. We've all heard a lot about fake news. But now we can start to see exactly how that can get out of hand quickly, especially with things like our 24-hour news cycles and social media and all of those kinds of things coming into the formula. So what can we do about it? I think that's really the big question. Any ideas? Shauna, how about you?
Well, of course, I go back to the theme of all of our conversations about slowing down and thinking and asking ourselves, do we really know something to be true? And it's hard, right? Because we want to look for those things that support our beliefs. And so then it's hard to push against that. So I think it's that slowing down and just really questioning, how do you know this to be true?
Right. Yeah. Good point. Good point. Slowing down. We bring that one up a lot.
Mhm.
Estela.
Yeah, I believe being more critical of the information that come to us, and also be critical of our own thinking process, how we, what is our opinion or our view of that particular information that's coming to us. I think taking time, like Shauna said, to reflect and think about, what is this meaning to me? And it's okay. It's okay to, take the time to, until we figure it out what that information would look like, and if it's really true, and if we want to practice or whatever we want to do with that information. So it's
Yeah.
about being more um, thoughtful and reflective of the information that comes to us.
Yeah. Run it through the lens of research a little bit, right? Jennifer?
Yeah, I agree with Shauna and Estella. We've got to address the elephant in the room. We also need to be self-reflective, and, be a little bit more critical of the information that we're taking in. As I was researching this particular bias, I found it interesting that one researcher said that acquiring knowledge in the subject actually won't prevent illusory truth.
Hmm.
And I read this. He said, "Have you heard the saying, know better, do better, do better, know better, do better?"
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's not true with this bias. And that was really interesting to me. We tend to dig in our heels and believe the lie. And so I think we have to remember that even though we're knowledgeable and, we have lots of information, that we are all susceptible to this particular, illusory truth. Um, and the more we think we're not, the more we actually might be more vulnerable to it.
Right. Exactly. And I think awareness is always one of the starting points for us too. So slowing down and awareness come up over and over again. But just being aware that this exists. Like, I'm not sure this is something that I spent a lot of time thinking about, this whole process. So I think we're all saying something, really similar here. The illusory truth effect is a tricky one to avoid. Um, and as with so many of these cognitive biases that we've been talking about, it's driven by that first easy, unconscious, and automatic processing system. So we usually don't even realize that we've fallen prey to it. I think that said, it is possible to get around this effect by making a deliberate and concerted effort, as everybody has said, to be critical of the claims that we encounter. Um, I think critical or reflective thinking might seem like it's just the obvious answer to this problem, but it really is the best thing you can do. The best thing you can do to really avoid falling for that illusory truth effect. I think we're all exposed to so much information every day that it's easy to just let suspicious claims kind of slide on by, or just move on to the next tweet, or the next Facebook post in our feed, right? But one of the things that I read that I thought was so important to think about is that by neglecting to think critically about a particular thing, the very first time we encounter it, um, we make ourselves more susceptible to this illusory truth effect. So remember that if we hear it or see it on social media many times, we can more easily start to believe it. And I think, that's something that I hadn't really thought about. There's definitely things that I probably saw on my Facebook feed this morning that in my mind I was kind of going, I'm going to worry about that later. I'm going to fact check that later. But if I see it 10 more times before I do that fact checking, I'm going to have a hard time convincing myself that it's not true, even if it's not a reliable statement. So I think that's a really important point, is to be reflective, but to be reflective right away, not to let things just kind of slide until we get around to it, but to really be diligent about fact checking things right away the first time we see something. So I think great conversation, everybody. But I think our time is probably about up. Any last thoughts before we say goodbye?
Dana, as you were talking about doing this fact checking, one other thing come to my mind is that I think we also have an obligation that if we are telling somebody something, to check ourselves to make sure that is that really a truth we know,
Yeah.
or is
Yeah.
that just something that we've heard?
Right.
Because we can perpetuate that too, right? I think about how often we do that when people ask us questions and we spontaneously give an answer and it may or may not be true. So I think, there's another opportunity right there for us to work on this bias, is to stop ourselves
Yeah.
when people are asking us questions about things.
Yeah, I know
So great conversation.
you sent me a graphic the other day. You texted me a graphic and you said, if this is true, this would be a really cool graphic to incorporate, right? And I really liked that you said that, because then we stopped and we thought about it. And we, it was something that we both had captured at different times. And I think I had screenshotted the exact same graphic.
Yeah.
And if we didn't stop and think about whether it was true or not, we could have just passed that information on. But like you said, that's not how we want to operate. We really have to patrol ourselves a little bit too.
Yeah.
Any other closing thoughts?
I think it's such an important topic, especially in our world today. Dana, you were talking about your Facebook feed and our access to so much information at our fingertips. And I was thinking about all of the topics that divide people today. And a lot of those are based on unfounded information or not, truth. And so I decided, what about a question that we should ponder after this podcast? So I'm going to leave you with this question. Are we letting what we think we know to be true get in the way of knowing the facts?
Oh, great question. I love that.
Yeah.
Some food for thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. Estela, any last comments?
That's so wonderful, Jennifer. Thank you for sharing that question. Lots of takeaways from this group discussion. Certainly, the one that I so much appreciate, Dana, is this idea of that reflective and critical process needs to happen right away. So for me, timing is a
Yeah.
major factor. And thank you for sharing that, because I think it is that time that we take to really find that if whatever information is true or not makes a big difference. So I appreciated this conversation in so many different dimensions, but that particular comment, Dana, really was my biggest takeaway
Yeah.
today. So thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, so many important things. So I really appreciate hearing everybody's thoughts. Thank you all for joining in. Next week, we'll be continuing our conversation about cognitive bias, and we hope everyone will join us again in a couple of weeks. And in the meantime, let's see if I can get it right, Jennifer. In the meantime, ask yourself, is what I think I know getting in the way of the truth? Is that, or the facts, the actual facts? So great way to end it. If you want to catch any of our previous episodes that you might have missed, you can find them all on the resources page of our website at greatkidsinc.org. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.